Hey everybody, I am Romi Hill and I'm the designer behind Designs by Romi. And this is my fifth live of six for my Summer of Lace 2023 knit along. And I am so excited to see you here. And I'm so excited that I can be here because yesterday the construction, like the road construction, cut the power line to this area, but they have it back up. And so here I am, and I could not be happier to be here and to see you all here. I am seeing you all in the comments, and I love that you joined me. So I have my speech to text on again, in case anybody is hard of hearing who's listening to the live, but YouTube will actually come along later and they will do closed captioning. So sometimes there are some kind of interesting spellings for words, but I have gone through and I hope I've gotten the most difficult ones, like Pearl, for instance, spelled Purl. So we'll see how that goes. So today I am going to be talking about bind offs and edgings. And that's incredibly important for lace. And that is because lace is knit at a looser gauge. So that means you often don't realize how tight or loose you may be casting on or binding off. And you can easily bind off too tight um, if you are not used to doing lace. And if you're more used to doing something like a sweater where the gauge is a lot tighter. So it's much closer to the ball band gauge when you're doing a sweater or sock or something like that. Lace is much looser. So you're leaving a lot of leeway there to block it out later. And you want your bind off to be able to stretch as much as the rest of your lace. So I'm just saying, looking to see everybody in the chat. So there's a little bit of a delay as always. So that means that you're having a bit of a delay. I'm talking to you, but it's not getting to you for a little while. And then I'm watching the chat, but it'll take a little bit of time. So if you want to ask a question, please go ahead. You need to be subscribed and signed into your account, and then you can participate in the live chat. I know that some people have had problems in the past, but and if you have had problems, if you want to send me questions ahead of time, I will be able to talk about those. And I have had a couple of questions, so I'm going to go over those today. I have a bunch of samples that I'm going to go over today, so I'm just going to introduce you to those first. So here is one that I'm going to go over. The edging on this. This is Time Heals. This was last year's mystery. So I'm going to go over that just a little bit. I have this big giant pile of stuff here. This is Rose of the Aegean, and we're just going to take a look at the edging today. And this is Fiore di Sole, and it needs a good blocking, but we're going to talk about the edging on this one as well. And this one is Lysianthus. We're going to talk about that one. That has nice edging. And I have a special request for this one. This is Lost Coast. And I'm going to talk about the edging on Lost Coast. And this is Te Ijite. I am going to talk a little bit about the edging on this one. This is Floriade, and it has a knitted on edging. And we're going to be talking about knitted on edgings today. And last but not least, this is one of the versions of Little Bit of Love. and we're going to talk about this edging as well. Okay, so let me get these piled over here, and I think I saw a question. Um, there's a question about morning trail, and okay, so question is the S2K2 together and the SK2P TBL. Okay. I'm not sure. I think I have to look up that pattern. So we'll see. We'll see. We might have to do a little bit back and forth. And um, so so hopefully between the two of us, we'll figure out how to answer your question. And then there's Tanya, I love your cast on video and wanted to know if you had any good resources that go through those cast-ons in different applications. So not really. If you have a specific question, I mean, I can tell you kind of about how stretchy you might want to have a cast on for certain different projects. And I can answer specific questions. I'll talk a little bit about that later, maybe make a list or something. So the cast-ons that I showed you before, um, I use all of those for lace. So those are going to be looser. So basically, if I was showing you a cast-on in my cast-on live, um, that means that it was loose enough to use in lace. And so depending on what you're going to be knitting, you always want to keep a loose cast on for lace. So there are other things also that you want to make sure are nice and loose, but in particular for lace, because lace is knit at a larger gauge. So let me see. I want to make sure I got everybody. I actually think I got a question from somebody, and I'm just going to check. It was an email, so I'm going to see if I can access it. Okay. Okay. So I had a question about chatting on my lives. I keep it in subscriber only mode because otherwise I have had kind of some odd questions in the past from people who weren't actually subscribing, and I'm just kind of trying to keep that from happening. So what that means is that you need to subscribe to my channel, and then after you have subscribed, you need to sign into your account and make sure that when you're watching the video live, that you are actually signed into your account. And you may have to actually like restart YouTube to get back to it. So, so hopefully that will work for you. Um, anyway, let me check the comments. I know I got some over here. Let me see. So, for the morning trail, if you want to tell me, I don't have the chart on me, so that was a special question, and I know you stayed up really late to ask it, and um, thank you. If you could actually put in, like, type in what the directions were into the chat box, if you're able to, then I can show you. Otherwise, I don't have the actual chart on me, so I just want to make sure that like I'm not steering you wrong on this. But if I can't do it right now, I will put up a little video later on, and I'll just put it in this playlist so that you can take a look at it and see how to do it. So hopefully, um, like I'll have you covered somehow. So hopefully we'll get you covered however it is, um, whichever way I do it. Okay. Alrighty. So I talked a little bit about it being really important to loosely bind off. And so looking at the other questions over here. Okay. Okay, I think I've caught up. There's another issue, and that is, as probably all of you know, stockinette stitch has a tendency to curl. So for some of these, I do a garter stitch base, kind of a background, depending. And for other ones, it's loose and like I have lots of yarn overs in there, and the yarn overs help to keep it from curling. So since this is knit at a larger gauge, that also really helps to keep it from curling. So there's more than one way to do that. Okay, so okay, for morning trail, I will grab my pattern and I'll just do like I know what you wanted to see, and I will just do a little tiny video and stick it up here, and hopefully that will help. So it's really nice to see you anyway. I'm glad you did stay up because it's nice to say hi. Okay. So let's switch over here. I'm going to talk a little bit about um, the different bind offs here. I'm just going to transition over to my hands, and we are going to take a look. So let's take a look here at time heels. This is a pretty cool example, because it really looks here like something special was done to get the scallop right here. But in reality, all this is extra stitches added in the middle here and then decreased out to the side. So the ones that are decreased out to the side, they're kind of pull the fabric away. And then up here, you have these stitches that are added to the middle here, and it just comes up and out so that you have fabric on the bottom. So scallops like this, even though they look like they might be short rows or something like that, they are not short rows, and they're really easy to do. It looks like it's really difficult, but in fact, super simple, just extra decreases out to the side and extra increases in the middle. And then you can see here, that looks like a chain around here. I'll show you how to do that. Okay. And here we have, this is kind of similar. This is a feather and fan pattern here. So all the way up in this whole column here, there have been stitches added to the middle and then decreased out at the side. So at the end here, we have this bind off, and it naturally creates a scallop. And the scallop is enhanced with centered picots. So this is something that I kind of invented. I'm not sure if anybody has ever done this before. I've never seen it, but I'm sure like nothing is new in the knitting world. So I'm sure somebody has done it before. This is just a centered picot instead of an off-center one. So I'm just going to show you the difference here. So this one is centered, and so you can see it's centered right above this center stitch and centered all around, as opposed to this is the more common picot. This picot is actually in between stitches, so it falls in between stitches. It does not fall on a stitch column. So it's very difficult to get it centered. You have to kind of mess with it a little bit to get it centered. So I really only use it when I'm just doing picots all the way around the outside of something. Okay, so we're also going to go over a knitted on edging today. So this is a knitted on edging, and it's knit at 90 degrees to the shawl body. So here are the shawl body stitches across here, and then this is knit back and forth, and I'm going to show you how that's done. So when you attach it, it makes this really nice little chain across here. So this one is Floriade. I had a question, what was the name of each shawl? This one is Little Bit of Love. This one is Taijite. This is an updated version, and that will be coming out in the next couple months. So I had a question. Would you please name the shawls that use centered picots, not that use centered picots and not centered picots? Okay. This is Taijite. It's uncentered. This one, Little Bit of Love, this is centered. Okay. So I just knocked like half of my stuff over. Oh well. Okay. This one has a crocheted bind off. So this is an actual crocheted bind off where you use a crochet hook and you chain here. And I will show you how to do this. This is Fiori di Sole. And it's basically, again, we have this sort of idea of those scallops coming out. This one's kind of interesting because this is the same pattern as this leaf right below here. It's just that it stops until before it gets to the edge up here, and it's gathered together. The stitches are gathered together as the bind off is happening. So it looks very different, but it's the same stitch pattern as what is going on down here, which is, I think, pretty cool. Okay, and then this one here is Lysianthus. That one also has a crocheted bind off here. So I'm going to show you how to do that with both a crochet hook and with a knitting needle. So some people were asking after I did the crochet hook on Fiori, people were asking me if there was a way to do it with a knitting needle because I know that not all knitting people are comfortable with crochet hooks. So I'll show you how to do that with a needle as well. And then I am actually going to start with this one here. And this one, this has a centered beaded picot. Actually, it's not really a picot, it's just a bead, and then it's pinned out when it's blocked. So this one is Lost Coast, and there's a lot going on in the bind off row. So this was a special question for me to go over this. So that's the one I'm going to do first. Okay, so I have all these, all of my samples in my lap here. Okay, so let's do Lost Coast. So Lost Coast is bound off on the wrong side. So a lot of mine I just bind off on the wrong side so that I can work multiple stitches into the yarn overs, because that gives you sort of the impression of a chain without actually having to chain. And it also gives you a little bit heavier edge here. So This one has no crochet chain in it. It just has multiple stitches worked into each of the yarn overs. Okay, so this is what the instructions look like. So you can see there are beads placed in the bind off row. And there's also things happening here. 2 stitches are worked into each yarn over. And you can see here there are different stitches happening on that bind off row. And while the stitches are being worked, we're binding off. So I just did a little cast on here, and I'm just going to show you what it looks like. So the first part is I'm going to be working a stretchy bind off while I'm doing this whole thing. And a stretchy bind off, you're going to work 2 stitches in pattern. So I worked, in this particular case, I worked 2 stitches through the back loop. So that was my pattern. And now they're going to go back onto my left needle, and I'm going to knit 2 together through the back loop. So that's my basic stretchy bind off. And I'm going to be working that all the way across while I'm working all the stitches as they're shown up here in this bind off row. So my next one is knit through the back loop, and now I'm going to bind that off. And then this one here, you can see that there's a bead needs to be added. So I am working with a slightly heavier yarn right now, so I'm actually going to place a bead with super floss. I find it to be much easier to place a bead when I am using a heavier yarn. I find it much easier to place a bead with the super floss method because I'm not going to split my stitches. So we get that through there. Okay, and I have my stitch right here. I'm going to pull that over. Okay, so now my bead is placed, and that was right here. Okay, so I'm going to knit that stitch. And here's my bead just hanging out. And now I'm going to knit 2 together through the back loop. So just like the rest of it there. Okay, and now we come to this little symbol here, which means on the bind off row, you're going to work 2 stitches into this yarn over. So if we were just knitting along and not binding off, that would have to be a knit and a purl. But because we're binding off, we can bind off after each stitch. So I've worked 1 knit stitch into the yarn over. I'm going to put both of those stitches back onto my left needle and knit 2 together through the back loop. So you can see here I did not drop that yarn over off of my needle. Now I'm going to go back in there and knit 2 together through the back loop. So I have 2 stitches worked into that yarn over, and the next one is just a plain knit. And now I'm going to do 2 stitches into the next yarn over. The next one is a bead. And so let me grab that. Let me grab another bead here with my super floss. Okay, so I'm just going to do what I did before. Just get that stitch off of my needle. Get the bead in here. Oops. There we go. And now it's just going to go over my stitch. So this is actually a DK weight yarn, and you can see those beads slide on there really well. And super floss, I've used super floss for Aran weight yarn even, and I've been able to place beads on it. So it's a little bit tight, but okay. And now just going to keep on going here. Okay, so I just did this other knit two into the yarn over, and now I'm going to do this knit three together through the back loop. Okay, so the reason I'm doing that is because they come together nicely. Actually, I'm one off here. I'm just going to go over just a little bit farther. Sort of not paying attention here. Okay, now I'm there. So here are the three that I'm going to knit together through the back loop. And I've done that, show you on my sample here. I've done that to bring this little cable here to a point so that it pulls down a little bit more and pooches this fabric over here just up a little bit more, kind of helps it to poke up as a scallop some more. And this, I think it makes this a little bit neater here. So here are the three stitches I'm going to work together, and I'm just going to work those together through the back loop. And now I have two stitches again, and I can bind those off with my stretchy bind off. And that just brings us together. So in a nutshell, that is what you will be doing all the way across on this bind off here. Alrighty, so hopefully that's helpful. Also for this particular one, there's a video that goes over this last chart as well. It was a live, and it was streamed as part of the Lace Club. That this was part of 2022 Lace Club, and again, this is Lost Coast. So I'm just gonna set this aside. Okay. Alrighty, so let's get some more yarn out here. I'm just going to go through these. So I was talking a little bit before about how to bind off if you have like if you have stockinette and garter stitch. So for this swatch, because this is just plain stockinette, if I want to bind this off, I'm going to put a garter stitch edge on this, because otherwise, if I just bind it off, it's going to curl all over the place, and I don't want that to happen. So I have done 4 rows of garter stitch, which in this particular case is probably enough to keep it from curling, because it's at a slightly looser gauge than it would be otherwise. So I'm just going to show you my usual bind off. This is my stretchy bind off that I was showing you before, and it's just my all-purpose. Not only is it great for lace and shawls and stuff like this, but it's really, really good for necklines and socks, for anything that you want it to be kind of stretchy and still look nice and neat. So I just worked 2 stitches. I'm going to slide those back onto my left needle, and I always just keep my right needle in the back here so it's in place just to knit 2 together through the back loop. And you can get going pretty fast with this. So just kind of working a stitch, knitting two together through the back loop. So this is what it looks like. It's basically, you're going to need extra yarn for this bind off. So generally when you're using a when you're doing just a plain bind off, you're only going to use the amount of yarn that you would use for one row. And for this one, it's going to be about double. So 1.5 to 2 times the amount of yarn that you would usually use for a row. So if you are a yarn weigher like I am, you want to make sure that you leave enough yarn behind. Okay. So yay, I'm glad that that worked for you, Douglas. Yay. And then Marianne is Lost Coast, a non-lace weight yarn. So it's a light fingering weight yarn. And also actually any shawl can be knit with a heavier weight yarn. If you like the look of it and you don't want to use the lace weight, you can just use any heavier yarn. So yeah, it doesn't have to be, it's going to be larger, of course, and you're going to have to use a larger needle and some extra yardage, but it will be fine. You'll be able to do it. It will look really cool. I love heavier lace too. So, okay, so that was just my plain stretchy bind off. So to do a centered picot, one of my favorites, I'm going to do basically what I did before into the yarn overs on Lost Coast. But instead of that, using a yarn over, I'm just going to use the next stitch. So I'm going to knit one into that stitch, and I'm not going to drop it off the needle. Then I'm going to slide those two back and knit through the back loop. I'm just going to knit 3 stitches into this one stitch, and after each one, I'm going to bind it off. So in all these cases, when you're binding off, you're always going to want to bind off whenever you have 2 stitches on your right needle. So you don't want to leave more stitches on there. And so let's get that. Okay, I'm just going to slip the stitch back so I can take a look here. So that's what the centered picot looks like right here. So when you're blocking that, you're just going to kind of pull that out a little when you block it, and it will look even more picot-y. Let's see. Okay, just checking to make sure I'm not missing anybody's questions. Okay, so that's my centered picot with a stretchy bind off. And it's super stretchy, so easy to block out. So if you're going along and you're not sure whether it's stretchy enough, just kind of stretch and see how it's going along here. If it stretches out as much as the rest of your fabric, you're probably doing okay. With this type of stretchy bind off, you don't actually need to use a larger needle. It can look too loose and sloppy if you do. So this is already a pretty loose bind off. I can bind off really tight with this, like holding the yarn very tight and still get a pretty loose bind off. And as of yet, I have not met anybody who can use this bind off and bind off too tight. So this is a really good way to keep yourself nice and loose. Okay, so I am seeing Devoted to Knit has asked if I could do that stitch again. I think you probably mean the picot. So let me go here. Okay, so I'm going to make another picot and bind off while I'm making the picot. This is a centered picot. So I'm knitting 1 stitch into this stitch right here, and I'm not going to drop that stitch off of my needle. So I usually just keep my thumb on it to keep it from popping off my needle. Now I'm going to slip both of those two stitches back to my left needle with my needles, right needle still in the back there, and knit two together through the back loop. And my origin stitch is still here, still up on my needle, because I'm going to work two more stitches into it. So here's my next knit stitch. Okay, so I have one more to go now. That's my last knit stitch into that origin stitch. And I can pop it off my needle, and now I'm just going to knit two together through the back loop. So that's what your picot is going to look like before you start knitting the rest of the way. So not very impressive yet, but once you get going farther along, it starts looking much better. And this is a way that you can center the picot right above any of your motifs. So if you have a motif that comes to a point, you can make a picot right above the point. And if you don't, if you just have a nice, like a plain edging like this, it's a nice way just to add a little bit of interest to the edge. Okay, so let's talk about what the traditional picot looks like. So this one is the one that I used in the edging for Te Ijite, and it looks a little bit different. Let me just grab that sample. So this one is a traditional picot. This is usually the picot that you see written into patterns as a bind off. Okay, just gonna get my samples off my lap so I don't die of heat here. Okay, so for this one, you're actually going to cast on a couple of stitches. So if you're going along and you're binding off, you're going to slip your last stitch from your right needle over to the left needle, cast on two stitches using a knitted cast on. So now you have 3 stitches where before you only had that one stitch left. Knit 2 together through the back loop, and this is the one I do where I do it through the back loop because it closes this area up here, and I think it makes it look nice and neat. And I'm just going to pass that stitch over, and I have created a little picot here. So for this one, if you're just going along and you have picots throughout, like on the Te Ijite sample that I showed you, I did not use a stretchy bind off for that because it's going to add so much stretch anyway, having those picots in between each stitch. So let me show you that again. So each of these picots binds off 2 stitches. So that's one. You can see how it presents between stitches here, whereas the centered picot presents right above the stitch column. Okay, so Claire asked for a taller picot, you could do 5 to 6. Yes, you could do 5 to 6. That would be a really big one. So let's actually take a look here. So that picot didn't look like it was very tall, but when you block it, you can block it much taller. So you might want to experiment a little bit to make sure that when you block it, it doesn't get too tall, because it does, the blocking part of it really does stretch it out and make it a lot larger. So I don't know, just steam it a little, see if you like the way it looks. If you want something taller, that would be my suggestion. Okay, so let's just stick this back over here. That's one picot. I'm just going to do one more picot to show you what that looks like. So there, it takes a lot of stitches here, but this really only binds off 2 stitches. And that is using a normal bind off in between. So in other words, just passing that stitch over. So that is an uncentered picot appearing between stitch columns. This is a centered picot here appearing at the top of a stitch column. Okay, so just want to make sure that I've got everything here. Alrighty, so let's talk a little bit about crochet bind offs. I have to grab my sample here. I have so many samples. Okay. So you can see up here, that's a little crochet chain. And then in between here, these stitches here, there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stitches, and they're just worked together. And that brings the motif to a point. So this is interspersed along here. There's a crochet chain, and then that's interspersed with working multiple stitches together, and that crochet chain makes the bind off nice and loose, so you're able to block it out nicely. Okay, and this one did actually use a real crochet hook. So let me just grab my crochet hook. So here I've got a crochet hook. For a lot of knit doilies, they use this crochet bind off. So you're just going to take your crochet hook, stick it through that live stitch over here, and chain. So for those of you who crochet, this would be easy. Some knitters have never crocheted. Okay, and then in general, you're going to be working some stitches together. So I'm just going to work 3 stitches together here. And then once I have those 2 stitches over on my right needle, I'm just going to pull that through. So that would be a crochet bind off. So because a lot of knitters are uncomfortable with crochet hooks, I came up with basically a crochet bind off, but using knitting needles instead. So you're going to yarn over on your right needle and not your left needle, and then pass the stitch over. So that's one chain. Yarn over, pass that stitch over. It looks exactly the same, and no one would be able to tell whether you used a crochet hook or a knitting needle. And you're just going to kind of keep on going here. And same with the working stitches together. I just work them together through the back loop. So I'm just going to work 3 stitches together through the back loop there. And with this crochet chain, there's no need to do that stretchy bind off. You can just do the regular bind off. So it really looks the same here, whether you use a crochet hook or a knitting needle. It's going to look indistinguishable. So let's see. Okay, just checking to make sure I didn't miss any questions. Alrighty, so let's scoot over to my knitted on edging. So I have this all set up here to start a knitted on edging. Let me move this out of the way. Okay. Knitted on edgings are so much fun. This is Floread. So you can see along here, just going to put it like this. So here is the edging right to the right of my hand right here. And you're going to go back and forth, working the edging. And after every right side row of the edging, you are going to bind off 1 stitch of the body. So here's the body. The stitches, it was knit down in this direction to the right here, knit down. So all the body stitches, I think there were over 400 body stitches on the needle here. And then this edging is worked back and forth, binding off 1 stitch of the body per 2 rows of this edging. So that's important because when you do an edging like this, you are often going to go around points like the base right here. So because of that extra leeway, so 2 rows to 1 body stitch, you can ease it around a corner like this. So these are not worked mitered because lace is open and flowy rather than super structured. So they're just eased around a corner. And in general, when I use knitted on edging like this for one of my projects, I add some extra stitches at corners. So before the knitted on edging has begun, you can see right here where it's attached, I've added some extra stitches in this area here to help ease around the corner here. You can also, some patterns will have you go back and forth and use some of the body stitches more than once, and that is perfectly valid as well. I don't really like the way that looks because I think it interrupts this little chain edging across here. So I like mine to be nice and clean across here, that chain, nice and clean. So you can see up here, I added some extra stitches in just to help ease across there. Okay, so it can be a little disconcerting when you're going along and you have gazillions of stitches on your needle, and then you come to a chart like this, and all of a sudden, what happened? It's not very wide. So how do you do that? And I do actually get questions about that. So like people don't understand how this is worked onto the body. So this is the chart for the edging I just showed you, and I'm going to show you how I would set up to work that edging. So the first thing, let's take a look at the first row here. So, and here's how you can check to make sure in the pattern if you are casting on the correct number of stitches to work this. So I'm just going to count across here and make sure of how many stitches I need. in this area. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. So I'm going to start the bind off by casting on 23 stitches to work this row right here. Okay, so let's take a look here. I'm going to show you how I set up for this edging. So every right side row, you can see right at the end here, this little symbol is used, shows to attach to one of the body stitches. So that little funky looking symbol there. So each right side row is going to use one body stitch. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's 8 body stitches for each one of these repeats. And then I have an extra body stitch on the bottom and an extra body stitch up at the top here. So I try to keep myself from getting lost when I set up. So even if it's a really large shawl, I will always place markers along here, along the body stitches, to make sure that I'm in the right place. So here's my first one that it only uses that one stitch. And now I'm going to go across here. So 2, 4, 6, 8. And I will do this even though some of these shawls can get really huge. This is really, really worth it. So take it from me. I have gotten lost in the middle of these bind offs many, many times. Like, I think anyone who has done these before, you only get lost one time and then you're like, okay, never mind. Markers. Markers are where it's at. So especially if you have, if you're doing a triangular shawl and you want the middle to hit at the point, so you definitely want to do this ahead of time so that everything comes out properly at the point. So I'm just going to do this all the way around here. And it's also a good way to make sure that you have the right number of stitches. And if you're going along and you find, like I do sometimes, that you have miscounted, you got distracted or something, it's much easier just to go back and see where that happened if you have these sectioned off into little areas. So I should have 9 repeats on here. And hopefully I didn't get too distracted and I'll be okay here. Okay, so I'm good. And that is basically what my shawls look like before I start my knitted on edgings. Okay, I am the marker queen, so I'm going to show you what I generally do before I start to cast on my stitches. I just put a marker here to make sure that I know where my body stitch ends and the cast on begins. You can never have too many markers, I say. Okay, I'm just going to cast on 23 stitches with a knitted cast on. I like this cast on. It's stretchy, but it has a nice edge to it. And I'll probably lose count sometime in here. Okay, I think I'm almost there. So that was my knitted cast on. Let's make sure here. Now you can see why I put that marker in there, just to make sure I'm not counting anything. It's just to check myself. So let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, 22, 23. Alrighty, so not bad. I actually didn't lose count live, which blows me away. Okay, so I'm going to take my Post-it chart keeper, and this chart is going to be worked from right to left. And right now it's looking pretty weird, huh? So instead of binding off, you've cast on a bunch of stitches. Looks a little strange. So I'm just going to start over at the side here and work those two through the back loop and just scoot along here. So for this one, the first row that you work is going to be a little bit difficult. It can get a little bit fiddly. So let's see, there's a yarn over here. I just want to make sure I have the right number of yarn overs. Just scooting over here. The first row is always the most difficult because you are setting up the pattern, and it's much easier to get lost as you set up the pattern. Okay, so I am to the edge here, and now I can kind of double check myself. I'm right to that little funky symbol right there. And you can see I have my stitch marker there to mark where I started casting on. That means that this stitch right here is an edging stitch, and the one over here to the left of the marker, that one is a body stitch. So that's perfect because I'm going to work the edging stitch together with the body stitch, and I'm actually just going to work around the stitch marker and then I'll take it out. So I'm just going to knit two together through the back loop. You could also SSK. I just like the way it's just easier, I think. And it looks nice. Looks about the same actually. So, and I'm just going to pop that off and I can take out the marker. So you can see here's the beginning of my little chain there. I'm going to take this marker out. Okay, so that is my first row. And now I'm going to turn over to the back side here. So on every back side, you're going to be slipping the first stitch. So that first stitch is always slipped, and you always want to slip it with your yarn in front of the needle, and that's what's going to preserve that really pretty chain along the front side. So if you slip it behind here, you're not going to get that chain. Only if you keep your yarn in front are you going to keep that chain. So I'm just going to slip that stitch and work across. So this one has a garter stitch border, but you could actually do this without the garter stitch border, and that's actually what I'm going to do this time. I'm not going to do the garter stitch border. I'm just going to do this stockinette. And at the end, I'm just going to do the last two stitches. I'm going to do those in garter stitch, twisted garter stitch. Okay, so that's the first stitch bound off. And it doesn't look like much yet. But you can kind of move this around to see how it's going to look. This is going to get knit back and forth. And at each time you come to these body stitches, you're going to work an edging stitch together with a body stitch. So questions. So Marianne asked, is this Estonian? Estonians actually use a different type of, a different way to work their borders. Like traditionally, Estonians sew their borders on and they don't do this type of knitted on edging. This is more, I've seen this used more in Shetland lace, like modern Shetland lace. They used to just sew it on. So yeah, that comes with more difficulties, I think. But they still do. They still sew on borders like this. And let's see, other questions. I just want to make sure that I have not missed anything. Okay. Okay. So Sunny, no problems that you're late. Because this will be here later. You can come back and watch the whole thing. So no worries. Okay. So now that that first one is done, we're going to move into this repeat section here. And this is built so that it decreases out and then increases back. So just an extra decrease here. A lot of these don't have this type of scallop on the edge, but I think most of them do have some sort of scallop, and it's nice and decorative, beautiful. There are lots of books that have all sorts of different types of edging like this. And I tend to keep mine a little bit narrower, on the narrower side in general, because they're easier to block out. So, and I'm talking about, these could be 30 stitches wide, really. You could, if you were working on something like a stole where you didn't have to block it out and have it flare like the rest of your shawl, you could have a really wide edging like this. And the really cool thing about this is that because it's 2 rows to each body stitch, it's nice and loose. So it's built in pretty much. And you don't really see where it's bound off. Like you can't really tell. You can't really tell how it's bound off when you take a look at it. It just has that really pretty decorative finish. So in this particular one, I added beads. And you can see here there's plenty of room to block that whole thing out. Okay, let's go back over here. Alrighty. Just want to make sure that nobody has any other questions or anything. So as always, I'm going to blather a little bit. So those are mostly the types of bind offs that I use for lace shawls and also just for everyday shawl and not necessarily even lace. I have seen people bind off with I-cord edgings and like other types of edgings. So when you use that like all the way around the shawl, you want to make sure that it's loose enough. And a good way to do that is just to go up a needle size so that when you stretch it out, it will be nice and stretchy and it won't like kind of constrict in and not let you black out the lace. So basically with bind offs, more stitches is better because that's going to let you do whatever you want with the edge. So a good thing to do, I think, would be just to steep it out as you're going along. See if you can stretch it. If it stretches out nicely, then you're good. So any other questions? Okay. Okay. Just making sure. So next week, my last live in this series, but I do actually think I'm going to continue doing lives, probably at least twice a month, because so many people have questions about how to do certain things. So I'm thinking I'm just going to keep doing something like this. So next week, blocking. Um, One of my favorite and like love hate things because you need a lot of room to block things out properly, and you need to be able to keep your cat from walking on it and stuff like that. So, but we'll go over blocking, how much to stretch your shawl, what to do with your ends, how to sew this in without constricting your shawl too much when you block it, and how to make sure that your beautiful scallops along the edge are able to be like scallopy. So, so I hope that these have been helpful for you, and I hope you'll join me again next week too. And don't be shy. If there's something you want me to go over, even if it has nothing to do with blocking or whatever, please just let me know, and I will go over that. So just email me. You can find me on Facebook, Ravelry, Instagram, Threads. I am all over the place. So let's see. Okay, just trying to make sure I didn't miss anything. Let's see. Ah, yay. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me. And I hope that I will see you next week. So I can't believe it's already been 6 weeks. Like the time just totally flew by. And I appreciate you all so much for being here. And I hope these have been really helpful. So I will see you around, and don't be shy. Let me know if there's anything that you want to see, and I'll be happy to talk about it, go over it, all sorts of stuff. So thanks again. Just going to check one more time in the comments to make sure I didn't miss anybody. Let's see. Yay. Okay, awesome. Everybody take good care, stay cool, stay dry, stay safe, and I will see you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.